just an overview of the things we've done this year and things that we plan to do moving forward. All right, so I always like to remind everyone that achieving equity is a journey and not a destination. It's not something that we can fix overnight. We know that a lot of these inequities have been around for years, right? These things just didn't come up today, and it's going to take some work. We definitely recognize the urgency and have things that we want to prioritize, but even this equity analysis is just a snapshot of data. It's just one data point, right? So this is something that I'm going to constantly be doing, is gathering data and getting feedback from our stakeholders to move this work forward. So it will take time. With small changes in our everyday practices will help alleviate some of the issues that we are seeing and ultimately change things, right? That's the ultimate goal. And so I'll get Dr. Kendra Johnson on. She's on Zoom. You all can hear from her.
So good evening, Phil, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
So good evening, colleagues. It's a pleasure to be in community with you. As Ms. Fields stated, I'm Kendra Johnson, one of the founding partners with Equity and Education Partnership, and I am here today to be in community around the equity assessment that we help to usher in with collaboration with Ms. Fields. Would like to begin by providing a level overview of the equity analysis process. First, it's important to begin by stating we anchor our work in the lived experiences of those who are closest to the students. So we are very much in appreciation of the voices that were uplifted when communicating with teachers, in communicating with administrators, when communicating with support staff, when hearing from parents and guardians, and of course, community and students. The lived experiences of those who are endeavoring to do this work should be underscored and valued. And from that work, we should be constantly leveraging their voice and juxtaposing that against the various other data points we have in order to measure the impact of our efforts. Those other various data points include, of course, attendance data, includes disciplinary data, includes achievement data, includes program participation data. All of these various data points are collected to better understand how our efforts are impacting students. So when we get this experience, we definitely have these conversations with your stakeholders. In conversation with teachers, begin by saying they are the most positive group of educators that I've been in community with for the last few years as we've been talking. The Waukegan teachers were proud to serve the students of Waukegan. They spoke highly of their commitment. Many of them stated they are graduates of the Waukegan School District and are committed to serving. That is something that should be leveraged. That level of commitment cannot be understated. It should be included and often spoken to, often uplifted as you endeavor to do this work in ongoing efforts such as the district equity committee, such as focus groups that should be ongoing throughout the year, such as ongoing, constantly educators to see how curricula is impacting students, to see how the impact of instructional materials, to see how the impact of professional development is awaiting their touch and reach. Furthermore, the administrators were very warm and welcoming in terms of their ability to meet with students, their ability to reconcile the needs of the district as well as the needs of the students. So the focus group interviews were very fulfilling to some of the assets within the district, which is relationship relationships, which is strong, and also some of the needs, which were uplifted as well as underscored in the written text. When you look at data that was outlined in the report, we used a racial equity frame just to help you understand some possible entry points. The 5 components that we use to understand how you might engage in equity entry points include a sense of dignity, a sense of belonging, racial inclusiveness, stability, culturally responsive disciplinary practice. All of these components are deeply rooted in research. All of these components can be underscored when you look at the body of work around equity, around how we can get to not only close, but actually eliminate predictable achievement gaps between and among racially diverse groups of students. And then what can we do to visualize practice so that we can no longer have these gaps that persist. So when you have an opportunity to look at these data points, some wonderings that you may want to sit with is what things are working well, and how can we put systems in place to ensure that those attributes continue to flourish, and then what systems that are in place that may need to be disrupted or may need to be altered in order to ensure that more students are able to meet with success. When you sit back and take an opportunity to look at the data points, one overarching theme should be very real for everyone. Folks that participated in this process with us want to be in white. They are committed to being white. And that is an awesome starting point. And leveraging capital that you have to work on some of the things in community with those who have lived in Waukegan for quite some time, who volunteered to go into the school communities, who want to substitute, who want to volunteer, who want to ensure that the community that they live in continues to thrive, should be leveraged and should be included when future conversations are had. This analysis is just one data point, as Ms. Fields mentioned, and it should be used as a data point in collaboration with the multiple data points that we have available for our consideration. I believe Rick mentioned right before we began this part of the presentation, this data assessment should be used to help you determine your strategy. And that is the work we do as a board and as a school community. Your strategy around equity, how you go about that is what these data points will help you get clarity around. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, so that was the process that she spoke to. We conducted focus groups, we had surveys go out, we are analyzing them and identifying those things. Go to the next slide. And this is the racial equity framework. So in your actual analysis workbook, you can find more information about the frameworks there. In addition to, at the end, that's where they have actual the live data. So the booklet is full of the summaries, and then in the back you see the graphs, the charts, the actual questions used, and everything with this quote. So you can go to the next slide. So I really like this quote when it comes to doing the work of equity. Not everything in the space can be changed, but nothing can be changed. But nothing can be changed until it is faced, right? You know, everybody wants to make a change, we all want to do something different, but until we really take a moment to look in the mirror and really assess what it is that our needs are, we really can't be effective, and that's what we're all doing here today, right? So just the fact that we've conducted this equity analysis is really progressive work. Not everybody is brave enough to engage in something like this, so you all should be very proud of this work. All right, so let's work together. Let's get in some groups. We're going to review, reflect, and discuss some of your ideas. I have some groups here. We have 3 groups that I pre-assigned you all to, and you have your section assigned to you as well. So the groups are listed here. We'll get into 3 groups, and you're going to need your workbook, and you're going to take a moment to just kind of orient yourself with your section, and then you're going to have some discussion amongst your colleagues around what resonates with you most, right? Is there any additional information you may need to know? What stands out to you? And we have some chart paper here. You can have someone be the recorder and jot down your ideas, and then we're going to come back together and share that out, whole group. How's that sound? You ready? Excited. All right, so let's get into groups, move around, and really dig into this assessment.
Does anybody need a copy of the analysis? You all have it? That's what I said. It's corner. You guys want to do this with the chairs on the board? Okay. All right. Jason,
Yeah, that was it's running up.
Speaking of the survey, did you think you guys
it's going to be, And what they're seeing too, right? Like, it's not only like what they're hearing, it's also what they're seeing. That it has negative impact on them, even if it's happening to show to. What I'm feeling, what I'm seeing, and I'm why do I want to go? I'm seeing it. And it's, it's two groups, right?
So I don't think that like the buckets of points there for the team.
I'd be interested to know, after that whole question, results, like how this would play out over the year. And we gave this from late November to January. In the thick of COVID, right? We've been 6-7 months into it. There was no end in sight. We have those kind of thoughts and ideas of the school and how they're treated, but we keep receiving, answers based on like virtual, the way that students and families feel that things are happening virtually, or were they thinking more broadly like pre-COVID? Where are my thoughts?
Most of that is COVID, the stuff.
do this again, we go, take the face on. I think it's,
More diversity or more people of color, you know.
These are some things
that
that
was
we're-
and there was one another.
Board is-
There was
yeah, yeah, right, right. Right, right. Yeah, and I also think about just thinking outside of what's the conventional classroom situation. Like I think expand us, but I think we have provide more opportunities for students in different settings. I like the idea of offering different just one word.
Like I've always said, in school suspension, absence suspension, now that we all have Chromebooks and stuff, if they need to be remote,
Yeah.
you know, and that has to be achieved.
Why didn't you do it?
If you're considered close contact, you have
For
to
10 days.
and no remote learning. How's that? I mean, so they're trying to figure out some more families to get vaccinated.
Here, let me hold this.
Okay, that makes sense. And I'm sure Stephanie can
Right. And if we look at visibility of these, there's like, where the perception the teachers have quite different. Just like what you're talking about. I have a lot of folks who are
Well, in my day, I'm afraid of suspension. You know, if I got suspended, I got there's not
how you guys have been children, you know, what they're learning, how represented they
So that's a whole
Yeah, that makes sense. But is it relevant? Yeah.
We know that there's a problem. We know that we're more dedicated. We want to get back. We want to reach. I myself wanted to be at least keep students in my this is how I got to college. Because we don't have that same experience that I did. But it's like we don't know how. We don't know which avenues to go. And I think that impacts everything. You think about sensibility, you think about, your sensitivity, but you also think about some of the struggles that are disciplinary practices. It seems like the people who are available to help us overcome some of our challenges.
Never came up once in 2 months.
And it's just
Speaks to, I think, what you were talking about, like that, really like history, I recognize it's not as important. This piece of history, sometimes we must out some
coming in the internet, it wasn't like, it wasn't like dynasty or something. What dynasty, I think that was really quite different. Because not only did it help discipline because you had that was just sick. It's Katie, it's Bruce. You wasn't going to do nothing in that classroom. Exactly what you were supposed to do. Get your lessons and teacher. Okay? And but we have so far away from that connection with the, I'm going to say, the community as a umbrella, but with the narrowing down parents of students. Okay, because you're not going to tell me if the parents at the time, and we're doing well, okay, to come in to the classroom and to maybe assist and not necessarily teaching or anything, but they're handing out that. And so, yes, and children seeing that does
Civil War, Underground Railroad, Harry Tubman. It's like the same thing, it just kind of stays at that level. You know what I mean? And I mean, whatever, I would be talk to Steve year after year after year, where you can just correctly go into railroad. At some point, I'm gonna be now, okay, I've heard this, tell me something different.
dire consequences because now we're learning more about things that would affect schools. Know that you understand traumatized. Yes, so that's where and that goes right into like
Baby college. Some of the textbooks are written, curriculum in general.
So, you know, I was
in my life, someone when there were and it actually happened in conjunction with all 9/11 and where it become a family and college all you know different school shootings and so
they're always
that were put in place.
certain, you know,
And they were good.
certain.
Okay. They were good for okay. And we were in the time of reacting and action.
So, I think it's like changing the approach and what we're doing earlier.
The talk of the county is finally settled down about the whole issue until we put the names on the school.
For another.
All right, we have about 3 minutes. 3 minutes? Okay. How about five? So make sure you're jotting down your talking points or that you're ready to share out in 5 minutes.
Maybe it's just I don't remember, so.
This is your 5 minutes. Make sure you jot down your talking points.
Well,
Those things were put in place.
so it was really we talked about there were
They set the tone for that building. And if they are feeling that ignore, how is that going to resonate to the people that they ignore?
It's gonna resonate with our student prison.
Absolutely. What to do in the I've always been one to believe that if the principal is over a bill, that they apparently have.
right. What were their experiences, right? Because they're totally different experiences. One very educated, another, coming up from the street.
In order for and that goes always relations with the staff and but it starts with principles. So
Discussion about what you were saying about CSP, what teams about kind of how students were sort of more right?
I mean, I'm right, but no.
Had that.
Well, the
that
athletes
feature.
were expected.
Right. And then, like, I was not against, look at it, Johnson doing this much, it was like, hey, you should do this, right? But not everybody, not this much. If you look at it, they just have to do it.
But in my day, my mom just said, I didn't know. And I was not an honor.
Okay, we are going to come back together. Thank you for engaging in that work with one another. It took you a little bit to warm up, but you all really done here. Some really good conversations happening. All right. So I hope you all have selected someone to share out. At this time, we're going to come together as a whole group, and we're going to share what we discussed, those points that stood out, right? It's probably best if you have, someone to speak. But then when we're done, we are going to engage together. So this is where we're going to have, really group conversation around this work. So we'll go ahead and get started with our group one. They were looking at focus group data.
Hello, testing? Okay. I'll try to be brief because I wrote a lot. Everybody has good points. So as we reviewed the themes in the booklet at the beginning, what we found is almost like an interlocking of themes throughout the different categories. And what we all resonated with and thought was most profound is that there seems to be an overwhelming sense of belonging or wanting to contribute to Waukegan, either as a district, as a community. A lot of stakeholders that were interviewed, they identified themselves in that spirit. And in that, though, there's a lot of nuance in how we feel empowered to contribute, right? So we talked about how parents and guardians feel like, they don't know the entry point or the point person in the district to connect with as they want to help their own, child through their classes or, to be academically successful. And that has an overwhelming effect on a lot of consequences for the students, especially as it relates to discipline, as it relates to their self-esteem, their sense of dignity, some of the other buckets. So I think that something that we focused on a lot about is that we have these people that we talk about, right? Like the parents, the guardians, the teachers, the staff. But it seems like at every role, there are certain barriers in that sense of belonging. How in my role can I best have a positive impact on the people that I'm trying to reach? And a lot of, at the end of what we talked about is how that directly relates to how we try to build community, right? It's more like grassroots than top down that needs to happen, and also it has to be with people who actually identify with the students, who look like them, people who are of color, and sort of can understand that these measures are being taken for a successful outcome for the students specifically. Maybe that's it. Okay.
Thank you.
Did anyone from the other groups want to add to that? Any questions you have about that? Okay.
And one of the other things, if I may, we also talked about, there was a theme that was very, very focused to me, that I zeroed in on, and that's with the administrators focus group. And it was really important to hear and to see this, that many of our principals are considering their voices and expertise evaluated, ignored, and not uplifted. And that's under a sense of belonging. And we as a district can afford to have our principals particularly feeling that type of way, because it will manifest itself throughout that building. And so that's something want to be connected with the school district, and but they are saying that the support for parents and communication, and I'm going to say, some say the lack of communication is impeding that sense of belonging to the school district. And so that's something that needs to be looked at, and we also need to make sure that that we are hearing community members when they talk about the systematic racism that is in our American systems. Okay, these are one of these things that people may not want to talk about, but it's there, and that's something that needs to be talked about. It needs to be addressed, and it's okay to talk about it. You know, if you're afraid, and one of the things I say, if you are black and are afraid to say white, okay, or if you're white and you're afraid to say black without stuttering and all that stuff, you got an issue, okay, you know. So anyway, but yeah, I think we did good, group one.
So everything we talked about was under inclusion, or under the umbrella of inclusion, and to build on what Ms. Hannah said. I think what resonated with us is that there's an opportunity for the district to really understand, like you started off with saying that this equity work, Tasia, you and your department, you can't do this alone. And that's, so you need to know who your stakeholders are. And it sounds like those principals who said their voices are devalued, that orders come from the district office down to them without their input. A. B, you've got a parent and community group who said that they feel ignored and not engaged at all also. So if you're going to do this work, what resonates with us is that there's great opportunity there for the district to make sure that they're connecting with principals up front, because there's going to be different equity issues at each school. A. B, certainly you've got to connect with your external shareholders and or stakeholders and really make sure that their voices are heard up front as it relates to whatever scaffolding or whatever you're building. And it sounds like what we got out of it, basically, to a person, was the opportunity to do that. But the good news or the great news is that despite all of that, everyone felt a sense of belonging, and they were here because they wanted to be here within this district. So that's something to build upon, certainly.
Absolutely, absolutely. Thank you, Group 1, for the amazing work you guys did. There was a lot of great discussion, I'm pretty sure, and I'm pretty sure you could have gone more than those 10 minutes. So good for you. And just wanted to highlight, too, in regards to the importance of collaboration, right? And as your group was looking at some of that, some outside organizations, daycares, nonprofits, and so on and so forth, they are really just waiting for us as a school district to say, where does the school district need help at? So they're looking for that collaboration. So it's not even just within our school district, it's within our community. And we're so used to working in silos, a building working by itself, middle schools working by itself, that we need to collaborate more. And how I just wanted to express the collaboration is really key there, not just amongst ourselves, but also amongst our community. And we can really knock that out of the park. Love that. Thank you. So, did anyone else have anything to share in regards to our focus group data? Okay, thank you all for that. So we'll move to Group 2. We go into our survey data.
Good evening, everyone. So we went over the survey data, like Ms. Field said. A couple of items that kind of stood out to us. One is some of the disparities that showed up in the survey results with our student groups versus like our staff and our parent group. And one, it's, students kind of more than anyone kind of have that awareness of the disproportionality of suspensions that occur or the discipline that occurs among racial groups. And another part also, and we're going to get to how we kind of tied in, was that students didn't have the same sense of dignity in the schools that parents did or that staff did. And then what we were kind of discussing is, what is that correlation to the, chronic absenteeism? If students don't feel welcome, if they don't feel like they're being respected at school, if they don't feel like they're being welcome at school, and then they're also feeling that there's, disproportionalities and unjustness in how they're being disciplined, and they're not going to appreciate it, how can we expect them to want to be in schools, to want to be in classrooms? Another thing that we spent kind of a lot of time discussing was the visibility, and how people responded, particularly students, and whether they feel like they're visible in the curriculum with culturally relevant content. And students had a much lower percentage feeling that, yes, I see myself in what I'm learning in class, versus maybe what their educators did or even their parents. And, that kind of ties back into, that sense of belonging, how they feel in the school. One other item that we did discuss was the survey itself. It was given out during not the easiest time, right? We're going through COVID, A. B, it was late November through mid-January, so in the holiday season. But there was a good number of responses. If you look at the numbers of responses versus other surveys that we do, particularly the length of this survey was, because this was not a 5-question and you're done survey, it was lengthy. And so we thought we saw fairly healthy response, particularly from staff and students and even parents. And what we'd like to see is how can this be used kind of as a baseline? The results we're seeing now, as we start returning to some normalcy, how will these results kind of play out, and will they be representative, a year from now, 2 years from now, especially as we begin to become more intentional district-wide in some of the work we're doing.
Did anyone have any questions or responses to our survey that you're going to? Thank you for sharing that. And we'll move over to group 3, who looked at our achievement and program data. Sorry, my notes are up here, so please put it here. Achievement and programming, we talked about 4 areas. There was a lot to talk about. We just couldn't get to all of it. One of them was about Appendix D, and that was about the student groups showing the proficiencies and improficiencies in the numbers there. And what we were looking at was the word approaching in those academic pieces are still not proficient. So we were concerned about that because what it means is that overall, give or take, 80% of our students are not proficient when you're looking all the way across the board, student demographics. And more alarming is our students with IEPs, they were at 98 to 99% not proficient. And this is in regards to, we're looking at math and and English. We were trying to dive into a lot of that, but we were going to focus too much in that area, so we had a lot of area of discussion. And so that was very resonating for us, and really just trying to think about potential strategies, just ask those questions. Why is this occurring? Why are our student population at that much unproficient and we're not proficient, and in addition, the students with IEPs. And we talked a little bit about the IEPs can also lead to outsourcing education. So we discussed a lot around are we identifying our students correctly for an IEP program? And even some of that, it goes a lot into our disciplinary practices. So under the disciplinary practices, we see that a lot of the students in there have IEPs or they have student contracts. Are those student contracts helping? Are they not? But there's also a correlation between student disciplinary issues and attendance issues that could impose a barrier for student learning. Along with disciplinary practices, we talked a little bit about the school to prison pipeline. And we talked a little bit about the collaborative agreement that we have with the police department and how our students are flagged as potential gang members. And after they graduate, that stays with the student at the Waukegan Police Department. And that can pose a potential escalated scenario for a simple traffic stop if they have that sort of flag under their name. So we talked about that kind of thing, as well as we talked about the why was there a potential route for disproportionality in disciplinary for specifically we spoke about Black students, and we were talking a little bit about, in summary, about cultural differences and potential generational differences, and maybe even a non-understanding between those two types of areas. So that was a whole discussion on disciplinary practice. There's a lot more we could have talked about. And then the last one we talked about was the gifted program. That one was that we saw the attendance had doubled starting in middle school. And that is alarming because we are identifying our gifted students earlier on when they're most impacted. So those are the highlights of the many discussions we had. Thanks, everyone. Any questions?
Any questions or comments for the group?
Thank you, Ms. Tasia.
Thank you. Okay, thank you all. You all really dug into this in a short amount of time, so I appreciate that. You did your homework, so I appreciate you coming prepared. So at this time, I do want to allow us some time to just sit with what we heard and just kind of open up the floor for any discussion. Is there anything still sitting with you, anything that you heard from the other groups that we want to lift up in this moment right now? So let's just take a moment and let's have a conversation.
I tell you, just one thing I kind of got about was just with my longevity in the district and what has, and I heard it earlier that it's been around for a long time, and it has been this proportionate discipline, okay, of African American students, but also Latino boys. They are also included. And I'm just going back to my reprimands because I had African American boys, okay, and girls, but I had Latino boys. And so we have to get our heads around those groups of students. And something that Ms. Leckers said in terms of in the classroom, okay, there is there's oftentimes, like she said, that cultural relevance that maybe some of our educators are not versed in, and that could be some of the reason why we see some of the disproportionate discipline. And I just have to bring back, I gave a teacher a number of years ago a book that the name of the book was Black Linguistics, okay? And she told me, Jess, she's still in the district, she told me that was the best thing that she read that made her understand that a student could say something, but it's not something bad, okay? And so we have to find a way to get more of our staff educated, if you will, with the customs, the cultures, the traditions in. We have a diverse community in our school district. And so we have to get others that may not be in our school district, or they may even be in our school district, and the cultural relevance they're really not learned about, and we gotta do it. You know, I was really hoping tonight that we're gonna have a big group of our staff here, so that they can hear what we're talking about. That's for that communication that's needed, so that they don't have to think that they're alone, okay, and lacking that sense of belonging, okay, to teach them that, if a student says what they may perceive as a bad word or something like that, that it may not be. And so there is education that needs to go along with this equity thing. Okay? That's fine.
Absolutely. You're speaking to being culturally responsive. You're speaking to being more culturally responsive.
Yes, yes.
And need for people to be trained to do so.
Right, yes.
Because you're not gonna just roll out of bed.
And have that, because there's cultural differences
Yes.
that everybody have. You know what I'm saying? People don't know, okay, and it goes back to what's in your backpack. Okay, you know, what you bring into the school that's in your backpack. You know, and everybody has something different. And so we need to just learn about each other and stop being scared. This is 2021. People, we on the moon. We ready to go live on the moon. And we can't down here, we can't even talk, okay, about cultural differences.
If there was some comments, I think, please.
This had a survey, right? I was using a parable with Steve who was talking. Steve talking to me about something in classroom. I said, hey man, I knew this show. Right away, there's a problem. I automatically set you up to look at me different or talk to me different. But I didn't mean you no harm. I'm just speaking, that's how I speak. So that's where diversity training comes in. And so I understand where she's coming from, but I guess I'm just kind of expecting around with all this dialogue and surveys we did. And I think, Katie, when I first met you, I told you that I was a community organizer here at Waukegan. And I told you that's the first thing we got to do. Am I correct? Let's get a survey and get the mindset of the people how they feel. But at the same time, it's more than not the people, it's the kids. And when it's all said and done, if we don't put things in place for the kids to reprogram their minds, because they got a different set of values, but they come from a different set of, coming from a different community. Their values and morals are already molded, shaped before they even come into the school. And sometimes they do that. So as a result of that, when we know that, we have to put things in place to correct that mindset and deprogram them, but they'll have some good morals and values like we want them to be, as we say, we want them to be upright citizens and to make it. But we got to put things in place that to really happen.
And I think that equity also can be achieved when all of our children are reading on grade level. It brings a different sense of understanding and pride if they are able to read at grade level and understand what's going on. If they're sitting there and not comprehend what's being said to them, because they don't know what a word means that someone is speaking to them, they're going to be lost. That's going to domino effect into problems in the classroom. And so we have to know that everything within this system is twined together. It's all there. It's tied together, and we have to put it all together. And but reading is a big part of it.
And it's not like we're drinking out of a fire hose. I mean, we've got 10% of our students are African American. They make up again 35% of your suspensions. There's a cultural disconnect and a systemic disconnect with some of them. Again, ironically, we make up 30% of the U.S. population and 32% of the prison population too. But then you look at your diverse learning program, and then the majority of those folks are African American, of those 10%. So what is not happening? You know, I mean, we can go through, and all of this is fantastic, but we can go through this and look at the coefficient of this, that, and the other. At the end of the day, it's not going to be your PhDs that's going to help you solve this problem. It's going to be common sense and empathy. That's what's going to help. But I mean, good old mother's wit is what they would call it in the South. But it's going to be that that's going to help you actually solve or resolve this situation and this problem.
Do I just interject in the conversation or what?
No.
You got it.
And I do
I
apologize.
raised my hand a couple of times.
I apologize. So this is not a committee meeting, this is a board meeting where the board is meeting and the public around the issue of equity. So the community is here to participate, to see the work of the board, but it's not our normal committee structure where you would just be able to raise your hand. We did allow for a public comment session at the beginning of the meeting for that. There was someone from the community, and I didn't know if it was either Ms. Briscoe or Mr. McIntyre, who had a question, and I did say that we would allow just the one question because the purpose of this one was to kind of focus the board's efforts and energy around the idea of release of equity. So if you would ask the question, we will definitely continue with the meeting.
Well, I don't know if it's a question as much as it is an observation. So,
So, my apologies. This room looks a little to me almost like a church where there's a preacher talking to a congregation of preachers. You all are the ones who pretty much already know what's going on. But where the community is concerned, so I have an 8 o'clock meeting. I was told about what's going on here about 45 minutes ago. I had no idea, right? The community needs to be involved in whatever you all are doing, but the only way we'll be involved is if we know. I had no knowledge of this. If I did, there were other people that would have wanted to come. This was put out, as I understand it, the 30th, 2 days ago, whatever it was. You can't possibly expect to get community support if we don't know. A few things that's been said here stick out to me, especially what Ms. Leguizamo was talking about with regards to the school-to-prison pipeline and whatnot. To me, the young people that I deal with, they have voices, they utilize those voices in a very strong way, but they feel like the individuals who are in the seats that you all are in don't listen to them. And for that, it's a little disheartening, if you will, to listen to their stories and their cries. And I'll be honest with you, I don't receive phone calls back or callbacks from anyone who I call in the district. I'm not sure why that is. I'm not sure if it's personal, but this looks like a great audience to say it to out public. I only call if there's a reason to call. I don't call to have a social conversation with anyone. It's more so because something must have been said to me that people want to get some attention paid to. And I'm not sure why that is, but if that's an example of what happens with other community organizations, the Amount Foundation is very active in the community when it comes to young people. That can't be denied. That I can't communicate with the individuals who have the ability or power to actually influence some of the concerns of the young people and their parents is disheartening at best. And if this isn't the room to address that, I don't know where it is. My hope is that when it comes to equity, I've had 6 or so people that I've talked to about the definition of equity. I think I got 7 answers. I don't know if it's properly understood, and by this being on camera, my hope is that if y'all haven't already, if you would, just define equity. Let's put a definition to it so that people would know it when they see it, but they would also recognize when they don't have it. I could probably talk for a long time. I apologize, but I have an 8 o'clock normal meeting. I'm late for it. I thought this was very important to at least come in for it, and I'll apologize to my guests when I get there. But that's my comments. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And I just wanted to add to the conversation in regards to the cultural responsibility and so on and so forth that we brought up was when we talk about doing professional development, I think we also need to be sensitive and also stay away from the word of they can't. I can't, she can't, he can't, whatever that is. Because for what I have seen previously, and the can't word seems to be a trigger word. If you tell a student, like per se, a counselor tells a student that you can't take this class because you're not going to pass, the student is like, oh, I'm going to rise above that occasion, and this is a trigger word for me. Either you are putting me in a position where you don't want to support me, or so on and so forth, right? There's so many things that word triggers. Another example from a teacher perspective, when we say the word, white teachers can't teach black students, which it has been said before, it is a trigger word. It is a trigger, because they say, I can, right? Is there something, tell me what that is. Tell me what that means. Like, what am I doing wrong? And so it becomes a trigger. So when we talk about doing all of this, professional development, conversations, I think when we talk about these words, I can't, or they can't, it's a real trigger word, and we really have to be sensitive, I think, around that. And these are things that I hear in our district. And so as we're having these uncomfortable conversations, these are some things that I hear from our district. If anybody likes to comment or add on
Not to put anyone in the spotlight, but last week we had a training with Mr. Harris and Mr. Garrett were both present, and Mr. Harris discussed that concept with the district leadership team. I don't know if you want to speak more on that right now, or are we going to throw you on the spotlight? But
Well, yeah, she did put me on the spot.
But you mean it's a trigger, right?
No, it is a trigger and it is a myth. Yes, we need black teachers, more black teachers in education in general. I think we talked about it last week. I believe they make up about 67% of the U.S. the population. Of your 1,200 or 1,400 employees, I don't know how many we have, but it's probably close to that 7%. The thought is, though, is that we do have to, in the true spirit of equity, we have to get beyond the myth that white teachers or Latino teachers or Asian teachers cannot teach black children, and vice versa. And I think last week when we were talking, I said, I graduated from the Waukegan school system. Out of those 4 years, I had 3 African American teachers. I went through 4 years of college. I never had an African American professor. But we made it through that. We made it through that just fine. So rather than, I guess it's a both-end proposition. We can continue to look and recruit for a workforce that mirrors our community, which may be more Latino, more African American teachers. We can continue to do that, but first and foremost, then we need to make sure that all of our employees, black, white, brown, yellow, all of them have training as it relates to cultural competence and equity and inclusion and so forth. And again, you don't go to class with the teachers that you wish you had. You go to class with the teachers that you got. And these are the ones that we have. They want to be here based on everything we've seen in this survey. So now, and this is a general, and I've heard people within the district say, well, yeah, it's a good thing you guys are doing diversity and inclusion training for all those white teachers. And I'm telling you, as someone who's done this for 35 years, we all need it. We all need it. I've been all over the world, and I can still say after 30-some-odd years, I'm learning more about other cultures every single day. So every teacher, every person who works here needs this type of training and this type of dialogue that we're having.
Absolutely.
So that's what we talked about. That's what we talked about last week. And then I'll go a little bit further. We start talking about digging deep. If we get to that 7% of African American teachers, I caution you as it relates to, well, let's be more and more and more. Because you don't want to go too far beyond availability. And what am I saying? If you have 7% of the population who are African American teachers, and then you within your organization, you have something over that, then you're not getting the cream of the crop. You're actually getting down to the bottom of the barrel at the expense of another demographic group. So that is something that statistically we really have to understand. I'll take it out of African American and I put it in male and female. If we have 50% male availability, just say for teachers, and then here in Waukegan we have a representation of 70% male, then I submit to you that 20% of those men that you have are mediocre to fair at best. And that if you would have stuck to that 50%, you could have hired higher level people in other demographics that you're missing. And that is something that's a tough conversation, a statistical one, that we do have to be mindful of, and not go by what we feel or what we think, but what do we really know. And we can get to what we feel and think later, but I think that's the second or third quick. Does that make sense?
Absolutely. Thank you for that. That misconception, it comes from, the studies show that all students benefit from having teachers and staff around them that looks like me, right? And that's just a fact. So because of that, then there's misconceptions. Well, that means I don't look like that, so I'm not good enough. And that's not the case, because as Rick is saying, we all need to be more culturally competent. We all have to be well versed in this, right? So it's about representation and really creating positions.
And just because I'm black does not mean I understand you. What about from Jamaica? What about from Haiti? What about from some other place? Just because I'm black does not mean I understand you. Or if I come from a very, very well-to-do family, you put me on the first ward, and I'm lost. So we have to somehow or another understand the concept of race, but put it in its proper place, right? And then move forward. I think not only black, instead of looking for black teachers, and just specifically, we need to be looking for culturally competent teachers of all races, genders, backgrounds. That's what we need to get out of the situation that we're in right now. So to this whole thing about, oh, I feel better because I see a black teacher. Well, if my mind is focused just on race, probably, but again, it wasn't those black teachers that got me. I respect them, but it wasn't them that got me. It's going to take all of us and a true understanding. Again, just because I'm black doesn't mean I understand it. And we see that all the time with all police forces and things of that nature. We see it right here in education too. So just something to think about.
Exactly. In addition to ensuring that our schools are culturally inclusive environments, right? That makes a big impact as well. Making sure when we walk in, the visibility is there, we can see the diversity, and we're really embracing it. Because as you said, everyone is different. They bring a different cultural background to the table, right? So we want to embrace that. So this is really good conversation. Is there anything else?
Okay. Mr. Harris was very passionate. Something that comes to, and I wholeheartedly agree with some of the things that Mr. Harris was saying, because I think that there can be nuance. There's room for that, and that's what I think these conversations are about, is the nuance. Because, and I'm going to talk about my lived experiences, right? Because this is, sort of the community guidelines that we shared at the beginning. That's what we should be really rooted in, and also what we're observing, what we can truly speak from. And in my mind, I think what's sometimes forgotten is that what makes a good teacher or a good person consists of all these things, right? Being empathetic with other people's lived experiences, understanding that your backgrounds don't have to be the same for you to work towards shared vision. And I find that depending on who you talk to and where they're coming from, right, thinking about those triggers, that it can be hard for people to understand that that's what we need. I love our teachers. I have more pride being from Waukegan and coming to our public schools than I have going and graduating from like an elite college, the college that I went to. I have way more pride being from here than I did being that graduate. And I think what is important for us talking about leveraging and what we're seeing in our data and our focus groups is that what's so important about our community here is that we feel that sense of belonging already to the city. We don't need to build that. we feel that we're all about Waukegan. Whatever Waukegan needs, we're like enthralled with that. We're attracted to that. But not everyone has the same needs of overcoming their role and contributing in the way that we ask them to prepare our students. And so I think that that's what I'm seeing here. That's what I've heard. That's what I've experienced. And I think that's the work. That's the work that we're talking about, is that we need people to buy into this. We need people to understand that this is not just a district Waukegan situation. It's happening everywhere. And more importantly, I think about the students, and I'm like, it's harder right now for them to envision a future that is actually going to protect and care for them. It's really scary thinking about what the next 50 to 100 years looks like for our generations. And it's pretty much now that we have to develop that foundation to move forward. And I think that that's why a lot of us are a little more ambitious. We're like, well, let's try it out. We've done things, we know the problems. Let's be a little bit more creative with the measures, because we're all here. It seems like we at some degree understand the stakes, but we're not involving who really needs to be here.
And that's the community.
We are a community, but the rest of us.
My only thing that I want to say to that is we have to, there are different meetings for different stakeholder groups. So this specific meeting is for the Board of Education to work through exactly what Anthony said. How can we go out promoting a vision of equity if the 7 individuals that sit around that board table have 7 different opinions about what equity is and what it looks like. So Ms. Fields has done the work to give us some strategic, some information that we can use to set some goals, but we definitely need the community. I don't want, when we say it was just posted, we've talked about this for months, today is in public. It was posted in line with our meeting, board meetings, because it is a board meeting. But I just want to be clear about that. The community is 100% who we need to be speaking with and will. There's a plan that the superintendent will present in order to dialogue with the community. But again, this meeting is, because I don't want Mr. McBride to tell me we haven't talked about this issue and we're not addressing this issue as a board. I don't want Ms. Hammond to feel like we've been stagnant 2 years from now when my term is up for president and we have some other people who may or may not be coming to the board. And so this is really our time this evening to start a foundation. Steve started it last year. We had COVID. There were other priorities. We are now recentering and refocusing this work, and it's super important. So I just want to make sure for those that are in the room, as well as those who are participating and listening via YouTube, is that the goal of this wasn't to be exclusionary or to not allow anybody else in. We actually heard from them first, which is the data that we are looking and reviewing this evening and talking about as a group. And then there will be future conversations in which we bridge those worlds to have the conversation together. But we can't go out into the community and talk about it until we deal with the issues at the board and until we actually have a definition of what equity is for District 60. So I just want to make sure that we level set with that, because I don't want there to be the misconception that somehow we are excluding the community in this conversation. As I mentioned, it was super important, as Mr. McBride stated, is that the first thing that Ms. Fields do is actually go out and get the information from the community and those who it was impacted. So as a parent, I did receive the survey. I'm sure other people, depending on their engagement, have received the survey. That data was used. Now we're looking at it, we're assessing it, we're talking about it as a leadership group of the district, the Board of Education, along with our senior leadership team, who's also around the table. So super important work. We have the recommendations, but I just want to make sure that we understand what the purpose of this meeting was.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that, I don't think I need that, no? I was, sorry, I don't know.
I just want to know what President Ely was saying. Out of respect for the board, this is the first time the assessment has been released outside of the district leadership team. So it is a respect protocol that we always, any assessment we do, any strategy, we bring it to the board. This is the first time the board has seen the assessment. There will be a communication plan. There will be an engagement plan on how this builds goes into the community, even within our staff, to reveal what the assessment consists of, what are the recommendations, etc. This is just the initial step. And one of the reasons that we have Mr. Gary and Mr. Harris with us is because they will be helping us with trainings, not only with the board, but with our staff or district leadership team. We've been speaking with Mr. Harris on training videos around cultural relevancy, pedagogy, etc. So this is just the initial steps. Many other steps that need to take place in the future.
Yes, thank you for that. And so we're coming up on the end of our time here, but on page 5 in your booklet, you can find information about the recommendations from our equity and education partners. And I did want to highlight bullet number 1 and number 4, as both of those talk about engaging our stakeholders, right? And so this is ongoing work, and this is definitely a priority, is really engaging our community members, our students, and one thing that you even said, one thing that really just stood out to me when we were doing our focus groups is how, our students, even when they're sharing about their worst possible teacher, they are so forgiving. They really truly love the teachers here in Waukegan. And so we definitely want to honor that and honor all of our stakeholders. So we will be moving forward with getting all input on what we're moving forward. And so as you all were talking, Dr. Knott was definitely taking notes. He was jotting down conversations that we're having, key points, and we're going to add that to my data set. And what you're looking at now is our district leadership team. My apologies.
It's Cameron who makes that up. Can you please?
Yes, so our district leadership team is made up of the administrators that you see here in addition to other department directors. Well, there's a couple coordinators there, so basically department heads. We all came together and did a similar model of this, looking at our equity analysis results. And so these are some of the priorities that they pulled out. So in addition to the data that you all have given here by looking at this single data point, we have a long list. We've got it all here, and we've got video footage if I forget anything. We're going to move the work forward. That's what this is all about, right? Understanding what it is we need to do and where we need to go. And then I'll turn it over to Dr. Noel briefly. We're going to talk about some next steps.
Thank you, Peter. So just going back to the recommendations, if you look at the conversations that we had this evening, you'll see a lot of common threads based on what the DLT identified as kind of priorities for our work, as well as some of the recommendations that came out of the study as well. So I say that to say that we're marching in the same path. We're all kind of marching in the same direction here in terms of what we see coming out of this analysis, which I think is important. In terms of next steps, kind of mapping out what we've done with this since we received it. We shared it with the DLT in April. We're conducting our board workshop tonight. Next steps for Taja's work is to develop this equity advisory. Can you go back one more? Sorry. Develop the equity advisory council and our focus groups that we talked about at the very beginning of this process. That should be happening in the summer. We have, as she said earlier, we have all the applications for people that apply to be part of the council. We're vetting those applications with a rubric right now, and we'll identify what that council looks like, as well as our different task force groups. And then, in terms of the work of professional development and training, which we heard a lot of this evening, is identify what the PD needs are not only of this team, the DLT, the board, but also our teachers, our staff, and everything else based on these findings. So we talked about cultural awareness training, we talked about implicit bias, cultural competency, culturally responsive teaching, all these different things that we need to focus on as an organization. We're going to identify what those needs are and map out a plan, a PD plan for our stakeholders. Next. And then utilize these groups that we identified to start working on this initiative. Tasia had that picture of the roadmap, or the stretch of road earlier, letting you know that, again, it is a process and it's going to take time for us to sift through all this stuff. You saw the list of recommendations there. We cannot tackle every single one of those recommendations and think we're going to be successful. We really have to dig down deep and find some high leverage recommendations that we think are going to have the biggest impact and focus on those first and eventually get to other pieces as well. But we'll utilize different groups to do that. And then lastly, we talked about Destination 2027. The end of Destination 2022 is upon us. So how does this equity work fit into the development of the district strategic plan beyond 2022? And how can we layer and weave that into where we see this district going in the next 4, 5, 6 years? So that's kind of the end of the road, long-term work that Tasia was talking about earlier as well. Is
Isn't there some type of legislation around equity that school districts must have in place by such and such a time?
Are you talking about the culturally responsive standards, teaching standards that were just adopted and approved?
There's some kind of legislation.
It could be the culturally responsive teaching standards that were just adopted by SB. We were talking about that in the group that I was working with over here. And the impact that that's going to have on changing kind of the landscape of how we approach teaching and learning in our district, and some of the critical issues that those standards touch upon, and how that's going to have to be legally woven into our curriculum and how we're teaching students.
And let me just say something. Again, I'm going to go on my longevity. And it does get frustrating, okay, as a woman, okay, it's frustrating. When when administrations change. And then we're here, one administration, and we get strides. Another administration comes in, and we have to start all over. And I think that not only the frustration as a board member, but also with the staff that has longevity. Okay, they get frustrated too because, and I hear it often, that something could be working just wonderful, and because of a different philosophy, okay, that's being brought in, or what have you, okay, then that kind of takes things and just dismantles what has already been done. And I think that we need to find some type of way to, if it's been working and successful, you build on it with the inclusion of the new. You build on it and, incorporate it into what was being brought in. Because, okay, we're going to set this up, we're going to have this initiative, we're going to focus on it. That's all we've been doing instead of implementing. We need at some point to implement some of this work that has been being done. It needs to be implemented. Okay, we get implementation dollars. Okay, so we need to implement some. And sometimes, believe it or not, sometimes just going at it and getting into it and tweaking it as you go, sometimes becomes the best way. So that you're not losing stuff.
Ms. Hannah, I'd like to build on that as a board, and you made the point, President. With changing administration, sometimes the wind does blow in a different direction. But I think that's why it's great that you are pausing now to take the board through all of this. Okay, so you have one employee. I mean, God forbid you should go anywhere, but if you did, you have one employee as a board, and we'll be talking about these things as we get into training around the evolving role of board members. Should your superintendent leave or leadership change, then it would be incumbent upon you all to say that the next person that you select will not start over, but pick up with what's running with all of the great work that you've done and continue to go forward. So again, that's not your problem now. It's not the board's problem because you have an incumbent here in the middle of this work. But I just wanted to get at that hopefully when we start talking about the evolving role of board members, we'll get into things like that. The other thought is, I know with this type of work, it's easy to get impatient and say, let's do something. And I'm somewhere like halfway to where you're at. I mean, we've been talking about diversity and inclusion for 40 years. We've been talking about and equality for 60 years. And we still have this deficit that we have today. But now when I see this work, and I'll say it in this audience, as I said last week, this is best-in-class work. And you're going about the cadence the right way. And at first, you have to do your own personal assessment. What works here or will not work here. If you go to Rhode Island or New York or somewhere else, I mean, you gotta let them do their thing. You have to tailor yours for what you need. I mean, because you can get engulfed in the 1619 project. It's not going to work for you. The critical race theory is not going to work. It's not going to work here. The whole woke concept. I mean, each of them you have oppressors and those who are victims. So you have to go through this work with your community stakeholders, internal stakeholders, and find out what your areas of opportunity are. and then build your strategy. And it's gonna take some time, but you're absolutely right. As a board member, you need to keep the fire on all of the administration and say, okay, we've got enough data now, enough analysis. Let's not get into paralysis. Let's start putting our ladders up against some walls and implementing some of this stuff.
Implementation, absolutely.
You know, I think you said it. We've been talking about this for ever. And at some point, we got to stop talking and start doing some work. And I understand what the equity is doing, but everything that I'm hearing, I didn't hear it before. There's nothing new about the involvement of parents, kids being suspended. We know that already. The question is, what are we putting in place? What intervention to correct it? And I myself, I have 1,000 ideas. And I'm saying that because these same kids, I've had to deal with them before. Not as well as myself. Gene is on himself. I know he understands where I'm coming from. Because the same kids that we're talking about right now come to us when they get out of school with the same behavior. But we have a different method of approach on how to deal with it. So I'm just saying that we at some point got to put some things in place. And we talked about the idea of the culture difference. It is a culture difference. And I believe every teacher can teach. That's that Ruby Bridges. She was a white teacher. She had a little black girl. Dang well with her. But there was some love that she showed. There was a lot of understanding that she's seen in that kid. For the kid, she may have hugged the kid every now and then. But and those things got to take place. And you got to have that kind of spirit in your classroom with your kids. Because, number one, like I said, our kids come to the school with a whole set of different values. And them values are sometimes not identified and recognized by some of the teachers that we in public. And that's what you talked about with the cultural diversity training. It is to me. I mean, I don't know everything either, but at the same time, I heard you say, I can't do this whole system. And I didn't have not one black teacher. And there was one, I hate to say it, but he was taught economics, and he was gay. But it worked, because 3 of my friends lined up that grew up with me turned out to be gay. So as it works, if the teacher can teach what they want to teach. And then not only that, in the classroom, these days, when I went, I didn't hear nothing about no Malcolm X, no Medgar Evers, I heard Rosa Parks, that was later on down the line. But sometimes you got to be able to teach kids and give them information that they can relate to and identify with. To feel good about it, and they can take it and run with it, add it on to something else. But at the same time, that's missing. You know, so I hope that now we're starting to get around to with this George Floyd thing. Now things like, we know it's a change. Jefferson has been to be now called what? What is it going to be called now? That's a change. John Lewis. So it's things can change when you want it to change. And we just got to start doing something different for it, you know. At the board, that's why we're here. To give directions to those we're supposed to give directions to the things that we see that's out of place, and give them some ideas and suggestions of how we want those things to go towards that. If it don't work, it don't work. But right now, we haven't even got to start. This is the start of what we're doing right here. So I hope that when this is over with, when we come get done, and then group that you talked about, that focus group, they come up with some ideas and just get a couple things to help out with number one, the first thing, the discipline of our kids.
Thank you. So we're definitely not where we know we should be or where we want to be, but I do want the board to take time because many of our board members have been on this work for many, many years. And there's been a lot of great work done, but we're still have strides of work to do. I mean, and just over the past 5 years, and this is not defending the administration, but it's really about the board's vision. And when we drive to Waukegan, it looks different, it feels different. We see some accolades that we've never had, the Blue Ribbon School under Carol May, who is a Waukegan grad, and exemplary schools. And there's, like I said, we have to look at that and how to build on that. But I'm going to stand firm that it has to be systematic.
You cannot just throw rice on a wall and think it's gonna stick. And you can't tackle everything because then nothing gets done. And so this approach of assessing where we're at, listening to our stakeholders, going back out, re-engaging them, because this just can't stop. We can't just listen once and never go back out and not re-engage, right? And we do have some points up here of recommendations that we need to move forward with, and we need to act upon those. But also, when you're propelling the work forward in any organization, the stakeholders, meaning the people that work in the system, have to be ready for it, and that mindset has to be there. I would tell you, 5 years ago, we weren't ready for this work. I had a conversation with Mr. Harris really early on in my tenure. Mr. Harris has been here. We were not ready for this work. We were not, our staff was not ready for this work. But now our staff is hungry, and they're ready for this development around culturally relevant pedagogy and standards that align to children that they can actually learn and meet them where they're at. And so we are ready for this, but it's all that pre-work that has been done that established the foundation for the work that needs to be done as we move forward. And I just want to remind you of that. I want to turn it over to the board president for our final remarks, and then Tasia will close us out.
Could I ask a quick question on the whole strategy here? So I just like to fully understand on building the equity strategy. Are we looking to have on there short-term goals and medium and long-term goals, or are we just looking at just specifically for long-term stuff that's going to take years to implement? And what I'm thinking about short-term is something that's just small but impactful, right? One of the things that I talked about, for example, was just asking every student how to phonetically say their name at registration, right? So then our teachers are not embarrassed on saying the incorrect name, or students vice versa, right? So just thinking, is this whole thing going to have what type of short-term, medium, long-term, or what that looks like?
Yeah, in my vision, I think it would be a little bit of both. So you have your long-term goals, and then you have those checkpoints, right? Where you're doing progress monitoring to get there, right? So we're, like I said earlier, all those small changes that will lead to the big change. So I think it'll be a combination of both of how we structure the plan, in addition to aligning it to our new strategic plan. So we just don't want to have a separate equity document. We're going to have equity, built into everything else. Yes, fully.
Can I say one thing? I was just curious too, when you do, we don't have to solve this riddle now, but when you do come up and build on Lucy's comments, when you come up with your strategy, somewhere in there you're going to have to find a way to, I guess, track accountability or make people accountable. And sometimes we just throw that out there, but if it's not part of my goals, if it's not tied to my rewards or recognition, my compensation, I'm not going to do it. So I think that will help you get to a place, and I don't know if this is what Mr. McBride was talking about or not, but once you get this work done and you get a strategy in place and you hold people accountable, you're going to look among, this isn't going to be a popular thing to say, but I'm going to say it anyway. You're going to look among your 1,400 employees, and there's going to be some of them that cannot or cannot do this, or they don't want to do it. And then it's going to be up to this board and up to you to really start thinking about the landscape of the teacher, the administrator, the worker that's going to be in this district and actually be successful doing this work. But unless there's some accountability to someone other than just you, everyone should be accountable in some way, shape, or form. And I think that's going to have to be spelled out. Other than that, you're just going to have a bunch of goals on some paper.
Absolutely.
So something to think about.
Yes, we will definitely have to.
I'm sorry, keep the conversation, just one conversation, focused on the presented, because there are a lot of great points. I want to make sure that we're all capturing as we move forward with this work. Mrs. Cesario, Mr. Linton, here is all over the board to see that sometimes, and I tell the superintendent, we often do, it comes, and we talk about it today, communication, right? How are things communicated? It seems like sometimes that rights being thrown at the wall, when in reality things are working in concert, and we have to do a better job of connecting the dots. as Mr. Harris was describing those KPIs and key performance indicators, and making sure that the work is actually goals and there is some accountability, that the society was reminding and just whispering in my ear that, hey, we're doing that work. The board just purchased the software and they have a cadence as to how often they'll meet and what things they'll be focusing on and the data sets that they'll be looking at. And this goes back to the Board of Education, this is why we can't, in my opinion, just say, give me every all the information. Is because all the information is data overload. What we want to say is these are the things that we believe as a Board of Education will move the needle, and how are we monitoring that work? And then as Mr. Harris said, how are we then holding individuals accountable for that work that the board has set forward? So I think this is a great start. I appreciate all of the feedback and communication. I'm right where I believe I heard Mr. McBride is, we're doing this. That's why we ran for the board. We didn't run for the board because we wanted to sit around and pontificate, and because we thought that we looked at the title to sit behind the desk. It's because we saw real issues, we experienced real issues, we have family members that experience real issues, and we want to be a part of the solution. So I commend this first step. I want to work with the superintendent and Ms. Mills to actually figure out what the cadence will be for the next year, because I don't want us to get distracted. This comes back to what I talked about by chasing smoke. We become distracted with what the new thing is, and we sometimes forget what it actually is that we decided was most important. And then to that point, as we go into the conversation around the superintendent's goals, if this work is important, then it should be one of our goals. And if we don't make it one of our goals, then we as a board are saying that this work is not important. And so as we start to have that conversation, and we start to figure out what needs to go on the plate and what needs to come off the plate, I just want that to be front of mind. So I thank everybody for their participation. I thank those who, Ms. Fields, for all of her work, by coming on and hitting the ground running. But this is a big job, and it's as quiet as it's kept, and it's not very quiet. And Ms. Fields is also a Waukegan High School graduate, so it is very important and a part of what we talk about. We have people who she knows the inequity that she dealt with. We know our experiences and inequities as friends. It's because I hope my only comment will be exactly what we said. Is I want us to be empathetic and introspective. It's because while I realize that I made it through Waukegan Public Schools, and that I consider myself to have had a great education, that there were others who did not. And I always ask that question, what happened to those other students? The fact that we didn't have a 100% graduation rate during COVID, we know the graduation rate is never 100%. But why were our numbers where they were? And who were those kids that did not want to stay? It's asking the why, and then putting the plans in place in order to address the why. And that's what they want to get to, is we don't want to talk about it. I don't want to be here a year from now, still diagnosed the problem. We got it on paper. It's not a theory. It's not an opinion. It's black and white. And so now that we have the data, we can put some of those suggestions that I believe Ms. Fields has promoted into place. And we have to keep this dialogue front and center as the Board of Education. So with that, thank you all for coming out tonight and for your continued participation. And Ms. Fields, you'll have the final remarks, and then we'll adjourn the meeting once Ms. Fields is done.
Great. Thank you all for that. I would be remiss if I did not acknowledge our staff members, our students, and our community members for their participation in our focus groups and our surveys during the pandemic. So we really want to appreciate them and extend our gratitude for their participation. I also want to thank you all for being